This is what they don't tell you about that made in China sticker. When you buy a phone or a toaster or even a brand new electric car, you think you're just getting a cheap product. That sticker feels like a harmless part of global trade, right? Something simple. But what if I told you that simple sticker is actually the smoke rising from a silent economic war that the West is losing? For 40 years, we were sold a lie. We believed the big companies in Europe and the US would always hold the high-value jobs, the design, the engineering, the marketing, while China just did the dirty work of assembly. They called it globalization. We called it smart business. Today, that model is not just broken, it's being dismantled. The Chinese government didn't just want to be the world's factory floor. They wanted the keys to the entire house, and they are taking them. This isn't about tariffs or simple trade disputes. This is about a planned, decades-long strategy that is pulling the rug out from under Western prosperity. It's how a country went from making cheap plastic toys to dominating the future of high-tech manufacturing, leaving the rest of the world asking, are we already doomed? This video is an exploration of that question. We're going to look at the 3 fatal flaws in the Western model that China exploited the historical turning. Points they used to gain the upper hand, and why your next car or even your next plane ticket is proof that the old world order is collapsing right now. Get ready, because the way you look at globalization is about to change forever. For a long time, the global economy operated on a simple, comforting principle. Think of it like building a skyscraper. The West places like the United States, Germany, and Japan saw themselves as the architects. They held the high-value, high-skill roles, designing the blueprints, securing the financing, and selling the vision. They kept the intellectual property, the IP, locked safely in their headquarters. China, on the other hand, was the construction crew. Their job was to take the plans and build the structure cheaply, quickly, and at massive scale. The West was happy because it lowered costs, increased profits, and gave consumers cheap stuff. China was happy because it gave millions of people jobs, pulling them out of basic farming and into industry. Everyone called it a win-win, but here is where the fatal flaw lay for the West: the arrogance of believing that the construction crew would never learn to read the blueprints. The West was giving away the fundamental knowledge of how to mass-produce imperfect products. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, when global companies rushed into China, they often did so under a condition that few people outside of trade circles paid attention to: joint ventures. If a foreign company wanted to set up shop in China, especially in strategic industries, they often had to partner with a local Chinese company. The stated goal was technology transfer, which sounded fair. But the reality was that this forced partnership gave the Chinese partners unrestricted daily hands-on access to Western processes management techniques, and most importantly, the specific ways to turn cutting-edge design into a product that could be produced by the millions. Let's look at a concrete historical example. Automotive manufacturing in the 1990s and 2000s, when giants like Volkswagen and General Motors entered China. They did so through joint ventures. They taught their Chinese partners everything: how to manage a modern assembly line, how to control quality, the crucial difference between a flimsy product and a durable one, and how to source components globally. For years, the Chinese partners were simply the local arm of the foreign brand. But they were doing something more important. They were learning. They were building up a domestic ecosystem of suppliers, engineers, and skilled technicians. They were gathering the specific, often hidden knowledge that makes mass production efficient, the kind of knowledge you couldn't protect with a patent alone. It's the kind of knowledge that only comes from years of standing on a factory floor. The moment the Chinese partners felt they had learned enough, they did the inevitable. They began building their own brands, using the know-how they had acquired through the joint venture. This is the first crack in the foundation of the Western model, and it set the stage for the disaster we see today. The West outsourced its labor, and in doing so, accidentally outsourced its industrial brain. China's current dominance isn't just a byproduct of Western mistakes. It's the result of a deliberate, two-pronged strategy: the acquisition of technology, by any means necessary, and the flooding of the market with state cash. The video you watched mentioned the alleged straight-up stealing of intellectual property, IP. And while the term is controversial, the impact is undeniable. The government's thesis was simple. Why spend 20 years and billions of dollars in painful, slow R&D when you can simply compress that timeline by acquiring the technology already developed by others? This strategy manifested in several ways beyond the joint ventures we just discussed. The reverse engineering loop. Take the case of high-speed rail. China started by buying technology from international companies like Siemens and Kawasaki. They used this technology, absorbed it, and then rapidly created their own domestic versions, often improving on the original. Within a decade, China had the longest high-speed rail network in the world, and they were no longer a buyer, but a competitor for global contracts. They learned on someone else's dime and then began exporting the final perfected product. This is not simple copying. This is industrial digestion and acceleration. The case of the better car. Let's look at the electric vehicle EV market. When Tesla first went into China, it was a massive win for the brand, giving them access to the world's largest and fastest growing EV market. But again, the partnership was a masterclass in technology transfer. Today, China's BYD is the largest EV manufacturer in the world. They started simply making batteries for other companies, but now they make the entire car, and they're exporting them globally, undercutting the competition. In many places like Australia, BYD cars are now massively cutting into Tesla's market share. This is the industrial life cycle completed, from supplier to kingpin. The jobs, the profits, and the innovation are now flowing back to China, not to Western shareholders. Punch 2. The fire hose of state subsidies. The second punch is the overwhelming force of the Chinese state's financial backing. In a truly free market, new companies have to compete based on merit, efficiency, and private capital. In China, key strategic industries, those the government deems crucial for the future, are protected by a fire hose of state cash. Since 2007, China has required its listed firms to publicly report direct government subsidies. Between 2008 and 2018, these reported subsidies exploded from about $4 billion to nearly $29 billion annually. And experts believe the actual total, when including cheap land, cheap loans from state banks, and tax breaks, is much, much higher. The solar panel disaster. This is one of the most compelling examples of market distortion. Years ago, the European Union tried to impose anti-dumping measures on Chinese solar panels because they were being sold so cheaply it killed European competition. The Chinese panels were cheap because the companies making them were massively supported by the state, giving them an unfair advantage. What happened? Did the tariff stop them? Not really. China just shifted its exports. When Europe put up barriers, China aggressively began selling to emerging markets. Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Malaysia, Pakistan. Exports to some of these countries skyrocketed by over 100% in a single year. They traded hard-earned money from these countries for mass-produced goods, securing future market share and starving Western competitors of the scale they needed to survive. The net result? China now controls over 80% of the world's solar panel supply chain. This is a complete fatal victory in a strategic green industry. This is the power of the Chinese state acting as a hyper-capitalist venture capitalist, willing to lose money for years just to dominate a market forever. Western companies, constrained by quarterly earnings and shareholder demands, simply cannot compete with a country that can sustain losses indefinitely to achieve a strategic industrial goal. The shift in manufacturing power is having a cascading effect, leading to a profound vulnerability in the West. This isn't just about jobs. It's about economic stability and geopolitical power. The loss of the industrial brain. When you lose the manufacturing process, you don't just lose the assembly jobs. You lose the industrial brain, the tacit, hands-on knowledge of how things are made. Think about a highly advanced product like a modern aircraft engine. The design is done in the West, but the manufacturing of key, highly technical components is increasingly done abroad. If a problem arises in the supply chain, the Western company, the architect, might struggle to fix it because their own engineers haven't touched the actual fabrication process in decades. They know the theory, but they've lost the practical, on-the-ground reality of production. This loss of competence means that when new innovations come along, the West is slow to adopt them because they lack the immediate, domestic infrastructure to scale up production. Conversely, the Chinese industrial base is constantly innovating on the production side. They are now so good, so fast, that in many high-tech areas, they are outpacing the West on the shop floor. This is how China got to the point where they are manufacturing products like some models of the Tesla Model 3 that are arguably better built than their American or European counterparts. The efficiency and quality of their manufacturing ecosystem have surpassed the standards they were originally taught. For decades, the social and political bargain in the West was this: you might lose some factory jobs, but you'll gain high-tech, service sector, and white-collar jobs. Your old manufacturing town might suffer, but your major cities will thrive with the new economy. That bargain is now collapsing. The high-tech, white-collar jobs, the design, the R&D, the marketing are the very jobs China is now taking back in-house. When Huawei designs its own communication infrastructure, that's a German or American design job that is gone. When BYD does its own global marketing for its EVs, that's a Western advertising and branding job that is gone. When a Chinese company builds its own advanced semiconductor components, that's high-value engineering that is gone. This leaves the West with a growing crisis. The middle-class manufacturing jobs are gone, and now the new middle-class service jobs are also at risk. This is the reason for the profound political and economic uncertainty we see today. The wealth and innovation engine that the West relied on is stalling, creating the perfect conditions for a long-term crisis. The current moment in this silent economic war is the climax. It's the moment where all the accumulated knowledge, subsidies, and scale come together to present an undeniable threat. The ultimate battleground is no longer making toasters or shoes. It's in the industries of the future, electric vehicles and batteries. China is not just leading, it's dominating. They control the raw materials, the processing, and the final assembly. This is an almost unbeatable advantage, giving them leverage over every other nation trying to transition to green energy. Advanced communications, 5G and beyond. The battle over companies like Huawei was never just about security. It was about who controls the pipes of future global communication. Control the pipes, control the flow of data, and ultimately economic influence. Artificial intelligence, AI, and robotics. China's vast. Government-backed infrastructure is pouring massive amounts of money and data into AI research, integrating it directly into their already enormous manufacturing base. This creates a feedback loop that the West, with its fragmented, private sector-led approach, struggles to match. The West's response has been, in many cases, too little and too late. Trade barriers and tariffs are like trying to stop a tidal wave with a picket fence. They might slow the flow to a specific port, like the U.S., but the tide simply redirects, finding new markets like the rest of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and continuing to build scale. This scale is the ultimate weapon. When a Chinese solar company can produce 10 times the volume of its Western competitor, its costs are inherently lower, its supply chain is more robust, and its ability to weather an economic storm is far greater. They have achieved escape velocity. The truth is, China's industrial power is so enormous now that it is, for the time being, offsetting its own crippling domestic problems like the real estate bubble and high youth unemployment. The largest trade surplus in history, over $99 billion in June 2024, alone is the life support system for the second largest economy in the world. This trade surplus is the clearest measure of the war the West is losing. So, what is the new reality of globalization? It is that the comfortable economic arrangement of the last 4 decades is over. The West gave away the shop, the blueprints, and the hands-on expertise, believing its intellectual superiority was an adequate shield. It was not. China, through a systematic combination of forced joint ventures, rapid technology acquisition, and overwhelming state-backed subsidies, has moved from being the world as assembly line to being the world as industrial brain and backbone. The consequences are urgent: the slow but certain loss of high value. Jobs, the rise of an economic competitor that plays by different rules, and the increasing vulnerability of Western economies that rely on a manufacturing base they no longer truly control. This is not a future threat. It is our current crisis. The silent economic war is underway, and the winners are already pulling away. The only way out is not through simple tariffs, but through a painful, expensive, and urgent domestic effort to rebuild the manufacturing ecosystem that was so easily discarded. It means recognizing that the construction crew is now the architect, and we are playing catch-up in a race we are losing. To understand the one thing the West must do to have any chance of fighting back, subscribe to the channel now.